never thought I'd be the kind of guy to doubt my wife. Rachel and I had been married for 12 years, and I trusted her completely, at least I used to. We met in college, and from the moment we started dating, it felt like everything just clicked. She was ambitious, smart, and always seemed to know what she wanted in life. I admired that about her, and I loved being by her side as she pursued her dreams. We both worked hard. She climbed the ladder in her marketing firm, while I built my own business from the ground up. Life was good, or so I thought. It all started a few months ago when Rachel's business trips started to become more frequent. It wasn't unusual for her to travel for work. She was in marketing, after all, and she often had to meet with clients. But something about these trips felt different. She seemed distant whenever she returned, her answers vague when I asked her how things went. She used to come back from trips excited to share stories of what happened, laughing about the funny moments with her colleagues, or telling me about a new client she was excited about. But lately, there was nothing but silence, as if she were trying to avoid talking about it altogether. One evening, after she returned from yet another business trip, I tried to get her to open up. We were having dinner, and I could see that she seemed tired, distracted. I wanted to give her space. I knew work could be exhausting, but the more I tried to let it go, the more that nagging feeling inside me grew. "How was the trip?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Did everything go smoothly?" She glanced up at me, her eyes betraying a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Fear? "Yeah," she said quickly, nodding. "It was fine. Busy as usual. The client was happy, so that's all that matters." She gave me a tight smile before turning her attention back to her plate, and I felt a pang of unease. Something was off. I knew my wife, knew when she was hiding something, and I could tell that there was more to her story than she was letting on. But I didn't want to push, didn't want to accuse her of anything without proof. So I let it go, even though my gut was telling me that something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. Rachel spent more time at the office, working late into the night, often coming home after I had already gone to bed. She was always on her phone, her screen tilted away from me, her expressions guarded. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just a busy time at work, that she was under a lot of pressure, and that everything would go back to normal once things settled down. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me, a constant weight on my chest. Then, one evening, I saw something that made my stomach twist with dread. Rachel was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it, my curiosity getting the better of me, and what I saw made my heart stop. It was a message from a man named Greg. The preview read, "Last weekend was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My mind raced, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the phone, the words blurring as I tried to make sense of them. Last weekend? Amazing? Who was Greg? I felt my stomach churn as the realization hit me. She had lied to me. Whatever business trip she had gone on last weekend, it wasn't about work. It was something else, something far more personal. I put the phone down, my hands trembling, my breath coming in short gasps. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, the air leaving my lungs as I tried to process what I had just seen. Rachel had always been honest with me, always told me everything. And now, suddenly, there were secrets, messages from someone I didn't know, messages that hinted at something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. When she came out of the shower, I tried to act normal, tried to hide the storm of emotions raging inside me. She smiled at me, her hair wrapped in a towel, her eyes avoiding mine. "I'm going to head to bed," she said softly, her voice casual. "It's been a long day." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be up in a bit." She disappeared down the hallway, and I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, the weight of what I had just seen pressing down on me. I needed to know the truth. I needed to know who Greg was, what he meant to Rachel, and why she was keeping secrets from me. I couldn't just sit back and pretend that everything was fine. Not when the doubt was eating away at me, tearing our marriage apart. The next day, while Rachel was at work, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew it was wrong, knew that I was crossing a line, but I couldn't help it. I needed answers. I logged into her laptop, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain what was going on. It didn't take long for me to find it. There, in her email, were messages between her and Greg. They weren't just friendly. They were intimate, personal, filled with references to weekends spent together, to plans for future trips. My heart broke as I read the words, the reality of what was happening crashing down on me. Rachel was having an affair. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and I had been too blind to see it. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief, all swirling inside me, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to make her understand how much she had hurt me. But I also knew that I needed more information. I needed to know who this man was, why she was doing this, and how far it had gone. I decided to dig deeper. I searched through her calendar, her messages, her emails, trying to piece together the puzzle of her life. This secret life that I knew nothing about. And the more I uncovered, the worse it got. There were photos, pictures of Rachel with Greg, laughing together, his arm around her waist. They were taken in places she had told me she was visiting for work. But there was nothing professional about the way they looked at each other. It was clear that this was more than just a fling. There were feelings involved, emotions that she had hidden from me. I felt my heart shatter as I looked at the photos. The woman I loved more than anything in the world smiling at another man. Her eyes filled with a happiness that she hadn't shown me in months. I wanted to scream, wanted to throw the laptop across the room. But instead, I just sat there, my head in my hands, the tears spilling over as the reality of what was happening settled in. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I needed to confront Rachel, needed to hear her side of the story, needed to understand why she had done this to us. But I also knew that I couldn't just go in blind, couldn't let my emotions get the best of me. I needed a plan. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I faced her. That night, I waited until Rachel was asleep, her soft breathing filling the room as I lay beside her, my heart heavy. I picked up her phone, my hands trembling as I opened her messages. I scrolled through her conversations, looking for any sign of Greg, any clue as to who he was and why he had come into our lives. And then I found it. A message thread between Rachel and someone named Greg, boss. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. Greg wasn't just some random guy, he was her boss. The man she had been working for, the man she had been spending all those late nights with, was the one she was having an affair with. I felt my stomach turn, the betrayal cutting even deeper. This wasn't just about lies and secrets. This was about power, about control, about the man who had taken advantage of my wife, who had taken everything from me. I put the phone down, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short gasps as I tried to process what I had just learned. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to confront Rachel, needed to hear the truth from her own lips, needed to understand why she had done this to us. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. I had spent most of the night lying awake, my mind racing, trying to come to terms with everything I had learned. The fact that Rachel's affair was with her boss made everything even more painful. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about deception, about the lies she had told me every time she said she was working late or going on a business trip. I had trusted her, and she had used that trust to cover up her affair. I watched her as she got ready for work, her movements calm and collected, completely unaware of the turmoil raging inside me. She looked beautiful, as she always did, her hair tied up in a loose bun, her makeup light, her smile genuine. It was hard to believe that this was the same woman who had been lying to me for months, the same woman who had been sharing herself with another man. As she reached for her keys, I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "Rachel, wait," I said, my voice trembling. She turned to me, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. "What's up?" she asked, her voice casual, but I could see a flicker of something, nervousness, maybe, cross her face. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's important." She hesitated, her hands still on the keys, her eyes meeting mine. "Can it wait?" she asked, her voice soft. I really need to get to the office. We have a big presentation today. I shook my head, my chest tightening. No, I said, my voice firmer. It can't wait. She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly, and she set her keys down on the counter. Okay, she said, her voice laced with frustration. What's going on? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to be careful, needed to keep my emotions in check. I know about Greg, I said, my voice trembling. I know about the messages, the trips. I know everything. Rachel's face went white, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find the right words. Mark, she began, her voice cracking. I shook my head, my heart breaking as I looked at her. Don't lie to me, Rachel, I said, my voice filled with pain. I've seen the messages. I've seen the photos. I know you've been having an affair with him. She looked down, her tears spilling over, her hands trembling. I never meant for you to find out like this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt my stomach turn, the anger and hurt boiling inside me. So you weren't going to tell me at all? I asked, my voice rising. You were just going to keep lying to me? Keep pretending that everything was fine while you were running off with him? Rachel shook her head, her tears falling faster. No, that's not what I meant, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you, Mark. I never wanted any of this to happen. I stared at her, my heart aching. You didn't want to hurt me? I repeated, my voice filled with disbelief. How could you say that, Rachel? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, and now you're telling me that you didn't want to hurt me? How could you do this to us? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret, her face twisted with pain. I know I messed up, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know I made a terrible mistake, but it's not what you think, Mark. It wasn't just about him. I was feeling lost. I felt like we were drifting apart, like I wasn't enough for you anymore. And then Greg came along and he made me feel wanted. He made me feel like I mattered. I felt a pang of guilt at her words, the realization that maybe I hadn't been as attentive, as supportive as I should have been. But that didn't excuse what she had done. It didn't make the betrayal any less painful. So you ran to him? I asked, my voice cracking. Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to work things out, you decided to have an affair with your boss? She nodded, her tears falling faster, her face crumpling. I know it was wrong, she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. I never wanted to lose you, Mark. I still love you. I want to make this right. I looked at her, my heart breaking all over again. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret that she carried with her. But I didn't know if it was enough. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, if I could ever trust her again. The image of her with Greg, the messages, the photos, it was all burned into my mind, a constant reminder of what she had done. I need some time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this right now. I need to figure out what I want, what we're going to do. Rachel nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with sadness. I understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'll give you all the time you need. Just, please know that I love you, Mark. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't respond. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my heart heavy, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I needed space, needed to clear my head, to figure out what I was going to do. I loved Rachel, but I didn't know if that love was enough to overcome the betrayal, the lies that had torn our marriage apart. I spent the next few days in a fog, the house feeling empty and quiet without Rachel there. She had decided to stay with a friend for a while, giving me the space I needed, and though I appreciated it, the silence was suffocating. I couldn't stop thinking about everything she had said, the reasons she had given, the way she had looked at me, her eyes filled with regret and love. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that she was truly sorry, that we could find a way to move forward. but the anger, the hurt was still too raw. Then, one afternoon, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Rachel. Her voice was shaky, filled with fear, and I could hear the panic in her words as she spoke. "Mark, I need you to come get me," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm at the office and Greg is here. He knows I told you. He's angry, and I don't know what he's going to do." My heart stopped, the fear overwhelming as her words sank in. Greg knew. He knew that she had told me, and now he was confronting her, angry, unpredictable. I could hear the fear in Rachel's voice, the desperation, and I knew I had to help her. No matter how hurt I was, no matter how betrayed I felt, I couldn't let her face this alone. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice trembling. "Just stay calm, Rachel. I'm coming to get you." I hung up, my hands shaking as I grabbed my keys, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what I was walking into, no idea what Greg might do. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Rachel face him alone. She was still my wife, and despite everything, I still loved her. And I would do whatever it took to protect her. I drove to Rachel's office, my heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and determination. I kept thinking about her voice on the phone, the fear that had trembled through every word. No matter what had happened between us, no matter how much she had hurt me, I couldn't let anything happen to her. I had to get her out of there safely. As I pulled into the parking lot of her office building, I could see Rachel standing by the entrance, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes scanning the parking lot, searching for me. When she saw my car, her face crumpled in relief, her shoulders sagging as if a weight had been lifted. I parked and jumped out, rushing over to her, my heart aching as I saw the tears streaming down her face. "Mark," she whispered, her voice breaking as she reached for me. "I didn't know what else to do. He found out I told you, and he lost it." I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close, my heart pounding. "It's okay," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I'm here now. We're going to get out of here." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear and regret. "He's inside," she said, her voice barely audible. "He was yelling, saying that I ruined everything. He said I'd regret it." I felt my stomach turn, the anger bubbling inside me. I wanted to march in there and confront him, to make him understand that he had no right to threaten my wife, no right to try and control her. But I knew that the priority was getting Rachel out of here safely. I wasn't going to let her get caught in the middle of his rage. "Come on," I said, taking her hand. "Let's go." But just as we turned to leave, the doors to the building swung open, and there he was, Greg, his face twisted in anger, his eyes narrowing as he spotted us. He started toward us, his steps quick and determined, his expression filled with fury. "Rachel!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the parking lot. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can just leave me and run back to him?" Rachel flinched at his words, her grip tightening on my hand, her eyes wide with fear. I stepped in front of her, putting myself between her and Greg, my heart pounding. "That's enough," I said, my voice filled with as much authority as I could muster. "You need to leave her alone. This is over." Greg laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "Over?" he repeated, shaking his head. "You think you can just take her away from me? You have no idea what's going on here, do you?" I clenched my jaw, my hands trembling at my sides. "I know enough," I said, my voice cracking. "I know that you've been manipulating her, using your position to control her. And I'm not going to let you do it anymore." Greg's eyes darkened, and he took another step toward me, his fists clenched. "You don't know anything," he hissed. "She came to me, Mark. She wanted this. She wanted me." I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut, the anger and pain flaring up inside me. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make him understand that he had no right to speak about Rachel like that. But I knew that reacting with anger wouldn't help, that it would only make things worse. I needed to get Rachel out of here, away from him. "Rachel, get in the car," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." Rachel hesitated, her eyes wide with fear, but she nodded, turning and running to the car, her hands shaking as she opened the door. I stood there, my eyes locked on Greg, my heart pounding as I tried to keep my emotions in check. "This is your last warning," I said, my voice low. "Stay away from my wife." Greg's face twisted with rage, and for a moment, I thought he might lunge at me. But then he stopped, his eyes narrowing, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You're a fool, Mark. You have no idea what she's really like. She'll never be yours again." I clenched my jaw, my hands trembling as I took a step back, my heart aching. I turned and walked to the car, getting in and starting the engine, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Rachel was sitting in the passenger seat, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling as she sobbed. I drove away, my heart pounding, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what was going to happen next, didn't know if Greg was going to come after us, if he was going to try to make our lives hell. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let him control Rachel any longer. I was going to protect her no matter what. When we got home, Rachel collapsed onto the couch, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. I sat beside her, my heart aching as I watched her, the reality of what had just happened settling in. I had seen the fear in her eyes, the way she had flinched at Greg's words, the way she had held on to me like I was her only lifeline. She had made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but she was still my wife and I still loved her. "Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I should have ended it sooner. I should have never let it get this far." I looked at her, my heart breaking as I saw the pain in her eyes. "Why did you do it, Rachel?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you let him control you?" She took a deep breath, her tears spilling over, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was scared. I felt like I was losing you, like we were drifting apart, and he made me feel wanted. But it was all a lie. He was using me, manipulating me, and I was too stupid to see it." I shook my head, my heart aching. "You're not stupid," I said softly. "You made a mistake. But he's the one who took advantage of you. He's the one who tried to control you. And now we have to figure out what to do next." Rachel nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. "I want to fix this, Mark," she whispered. "I want to fix us. I love you, and I hate what I've done to you, to us. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I looked at her, my heart heavy with a mix of love and pain. I didn't know if we could ever fully recover from this. Didn't know if I could ever truly forgive her. But I knew that I wanted to try. I loved her, despite everything, and I wasn't ready to give up on us just yet. "We're going to take this one day at a time," I said finally, my voice cracking. "It's not going to be easy, and it's going to take time. But I'm willing to try if you are." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with hope, her tears spilling over. "I am," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I want to fight for us. I love you, Mark." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, my heart aching. "I love you too," I said softly, "and we're going to get through this. Together." The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges that I wasn't sure we could overcome. But as I sat there, holding Rachel's hand, I realized that I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. We had been through hell, but we were still here, still fighting. And that had to count for something. The days that followed our confrontation with Greg were tense, filled with a mix of fear, uncertainty, and fragile hope. Rachel had decided to take a leave of absence from work, knowing that she couldn't continue in that environment. Not with Greg still there, not after everything that had happened. I supported her decision completely. There was no way she could go back to that office, not after he had made her life a nightmare. We spent those days trying to rebuild, trying to find our way back to each other. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger and hurt resurfaced, when I'd catch myself wondering how she could have chosen him, how she could have let things go so far. And there were moments when she would break down, the guilt and shame of what she had done consuming her, leaving her in tears. But through it all, we kept talking, kept trying to understand each other, to find a way forward. One night, as we sat together on the couch, the kids asleep upstairs, Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with pain and determination. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling, "I want you to know everything. I want you to ask me anything you need to. I know I've hurt you and I hate what I've done. But I also know that if we're going to move forward, you need answers. You deserve answers." I took a deep breath, my heart heavy. I had been wanting to ask her questions, wanting to understand why things had happened the way they did, but I had been too afraid. Afraid that the answers would be too painful, afraid that they would make it impossible for me to forgive her. But Rachel was right. If we were ever going to heal, I needed to understand. "Why him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why Greg? What was it about him that made you?" Rachel looked down, her tears spilling over, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. "I think it was because he made me feel like I was important," she said softly. "He noticed me, complimented me, made me feel like I mattered. I felt like we were drifting apart. Mark, you were always so busy with work, and I know I was too, but I guess I felt like we weren't really connected anymore. And then Greg started paying attention to me, and I let myself get caught up in it." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "It wasn't love," she whispered. "It was never love. It was just a distraction, a way to feel like I was still wanted, like I still had something to offer. But it was a mistake, a terrible mistake." I nodded, my heart aching at her words. I could understand what she was saying. I knew that things had been tough for us, that we had both been so caught up in our own lives that we had lost sight of each other. But it still hurt. It still felt like a betrayal, like she had chosen someone else over me, over us. "Did you ever think about ending it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did you ever want to stop?" Rachel nodded, her tears falling faster now. "Yes," she whispered. "I wanted to end it so many times, but he wouldn't let me. He kept pressuring me, kept using his position to manipulate me. I was scared, Mark. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I felt trapped, and I didn't know how to get out." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Her words made sense, but they didn't make the pain go away. It was hard to hear, hard to accept that the woman I loved had felt so disconnected from me that she had turned to someone else. But as I looked at her, the regret and pain in her eyes, I knew that she was telling the truth. She had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but she was willing to do whatever it took to make it right. "What about now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you still have feelings for him?" Rachel shook her head, her tears spilling over, her face filled with anguish. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't. I hate him for what he did to me, for what he did to us. He used me, manipulated me, and I was too blind to see it. But I don't love him. I never did. I love you, Mark. I always have." I looked at her, my heart breaking all over again. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could move past this, that we could find a way to rebuild what we had lost. But the hurt was still there, the trust still broken, and I didn't know if we could ever truly recover. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice cracking. I want to move forward, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time." Rachel nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with determination. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how long it takes. I love you, and I want to make this right." I took a deep breath, my heart heavy. "We'll take it one day at a time," I said softly, my voice trembling. "We'll try. That's all we can do." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a chance, for giving us a chance." The days turned into weeks, and Rachel and I continued to work on our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the pain resurfaced, moments when the trust felt impossible to rebuild. But we were trying. We were talking more, spending more time together, trying to find our way back to each other. It was a slow process, but I could see the effort Rachel was putting in, the way she was trying to show me that she was committed to us, that she was willing to fight for our marriage. One afternoon, Rachel suggested that we go away for the weekend, just the two of us. She wanted to get out of town, to leave behind all the pain and stress, even if just for a little while. I was hesitant at first, unsure if I was ready for something like that, unsure if we were ready. But as I looked at her, her eyes filled with hope, I realized that maybe this was exactly what we needed. A chance to reconnect, to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place. We drove up to a small cabin in the mountains, a place we had visited once before years ago when we were still newlyweds. The drive was quiet, the air between us filled with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. When we arrived, I could see Rachel's face light up, her eyes filled with emotion as she looked at the cabin. The memories of our first trip here coming back. "It's just like I remember," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I've missed this. I've missed us." I nodded, my heart heavy but hopeful. "Yeah," I said softly. "I've missed this too." We spent the weekend walking through the woods, cooking together, sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like we were finding our way back to each other, one step at a time. There were still moments of pain, moments when the memories of what had happened threatened to pull us apart. But there were also moments of hope, moments when I looked at Rachel and saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I still loved, despite everything. One night, as we sat by the fire, Rachel turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my heart aching. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think we're getting there. We're trying, and that's all we can do." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I love you, Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking, "and I'm so grateful that you're giving me a chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make this right." I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, my heart filled with a mix of love and pain. "I love you too," I said softly, "and we're going to get through this, one day at a time." The weekend was a turning point, a chance to leave behind the darkness, even if just for a little while, and focus on what mattered most: each other. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful. I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal, to rebuild what had been broken. As we drove back home, the sun setting behind us, Rachel reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion, "for everything." I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. "We're in this together," I said softly, "no matter what." And as we drove into the night, I realized that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about choosing each other every day, despite the pain, despite the hurt. It was about fighting for each other, even when it seemed impossible. And that was exactly what Rachel and I were going to do. Fight for our love, one day at a time. When we got back home from our weekend getaway, I felt a glimmer of hope. Rachel and I were reconnecting, trying to rebuild what had been broken, and for the first time in a long while, I believed that we had a chance at finding happiness again. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still times when I struggled with what had happened. But we were working on it, and that was enough. However, as the days went by, it became clear that we couldn't just move on without facing the consequences of what had happened with Greg. He was still out there, still a threat, and the fear of what he might do lingered in the back of our minds. Rachel hadn't heard from him since that day at the office, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he made another move. He was manipulative, controlling, and I knew he wouldn't just let this go. One afternoon, as I was working in my office at home, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Rachel. "Mark, can you come to the living room? There's someone here." My heart sank, dread washing over me as I read the message. I quickly stood up and made my way to the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. When I entered the room, I found Rachel standing by the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale. And there, standing in the doorway, was Detective Harris. "Mr. Reynolds?" he said, his voice calm but serious. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but we need to talk. It's about Greg." Rachel turned to me, her eyes wide with fear, and I felt my stomach twist. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling as I looked at Harris. "What happened?" Harris took a deep breath, his expression grim. "We've received some new information about Greg. It seems that he's been involved in more than just an inappropriate relationship with your wife. We have reason to believe that he's been using his position to manipulate and exploit several employees at the company, Rachel included." Rachel's face went even paler, her eyes filling with tears. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The detective sighed, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "We've had a few other employees come forward in the last few days, sharing similar stories of manipulation and coercion. We're building a case against him, but it's going to take time. We need as much evidence as possible, and we were hoping you'd be willing to provide a statement, Rachel." I could see the fear in Rachel's eyes, the way her hands trembled as she tried to process what he was saying. I don't know," she whispered. "I'm scared. What if he comes after me? What if he tries to hurt us?" Harris nodded, his expression understanding. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said softly, "and I understand your fear. But the more people who come forward, the stronger our case will be. We can protect you, Rachel. We can make sure he doesn't hurt you again. But we need your help." Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty, her face twisted with fear. I walked over to her, taking her hands in mine, squeezing them gently. "It's your choice," I said softly, my voice trembling. "But I think this is the right thing to do. If we want to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else, we have to stand up to him." She nodded, her tears spilling over, her hands still trembling. "Okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll do it. I'll give a statement." Harris smiled, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Rachel," he said. "This means a lot, not just for the case, but for the other women he's hurt. You're helping to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." The detective stayed for a while longer, going over the process with Rachel, explaining what she could expect. I could see how difficult it was for her. The fear, the anxiety, but I was also proud of her. This was a big step, and I knew how much courage it took for her to agree to it. When Harris finally left, Rachel sank onto the couch, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, sitting down beside her, my heart aching as I watched her. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." She looked at me, her tears spilling over, her eyes filled with determination. "I want to do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need to do this, Mark. For me, for us, for everyone he's hurt. I can't let him control me anymore. I can't let him get away with it." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, my heart swelling with love and pride. "I'm here," I said softly, "every step of the way. You're not alone." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I know this is the right thing to do. I want to move forward, Mark. I want to leave all of this behind and start over." I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, my heart heavy with both love and fear. I knew that this wasn't going to be easy, that the road ahead was still filled with challenges. But I also knew that this was a step toward healing, a step toward reclaiming our lives from the darkness that had taken hold. Over the next few days, Rachel worked with Detective Harris to prepare her statement. It was emotionally draining for her, reliving everything that had happened, confronting the reality of what Greg had done. But she was determined, and I could see the strength in her, the way she was fighting to take back control of her life. I was there with her for every step, supporting her, holding her when she broke down, reminding her that she wasn't alone. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting with Harris, Rachel and I sat on the porch, the sun setting in the distance, casting a warm glow over the yard. She looked at me, her eyes filled with exhaustion but also with a sense of resolve that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Do you think we'll ever be able to move past this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my heart aching. "I think it's going to take time," I said honestly. "But I think we're on the right path. We're taking control, we're fighting back, and we're doing it together. That's what matters." She nodded, her tears welling up, and she looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "I hate that I let him do this to me," she whispered. "I hate that I let him come between us. But I'm not going to let him win. I'm going to fight for us, for our family." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "And I'm going to fight with you," I said softly, my voice cracking. "We're in this together, no matter what." Rachel smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. We sat there in silence, the warmth of the setting sun on our faces, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on us. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't over, but it was a start. A step toward healing, a step toward reclaiming our lives. A few days later, Rachel gave her statement to the police. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done, but she did it with grace and courage. I was there with her, holding her hand, offering whatever comfort I could. I could see how much it took out of her, how draining it was to confront everything that had happened. But I could also see the strength in her, the determination to take back control, to make sure that Greg couldn't hurt anyone else. Afterward, as we walked out of the police station, Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I finally told them everything. I finally stood up to him." I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close, my heart swelling with love and pride. "I'm so proud of you," I said softly, my voice cracking. "You're stronger than you know, Rachel. And I love you." She looked up at me, her tears spilling over, her eyes filled with emotion. "I love you too, Mark," she whispered. "And I promise I'm going to do whatever it takes to make things right. I want us to be okay again." I nodded, my heart heavy but hopeful. "We're getting there," I said softly, "one step at a time." As we drove home, the sun setting in the distance, I felt a sense of hope. A sense that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But we were fighting and we were doing it together. And that was enough. The weeks that followed Rachel's statement to the police were filled with ups and downs. The relief that came from standing up to Greg was mixed with the uncertainty of what would happen next. The police were investigating, and Greg had been placed on administrative leave at the company. It was clear that his influence was beginning to crumble, but it wasn't over yet. The fear of what he might do next lingered in the background, a constant reminder that we weren't entirely free from him. But amidst all of that, Rachel and I began to find our way back to each other. The distance that had grown between us was slowly beginning to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of connection and understanding. We were spending more time together, cooking meals, taking walks, talking late into the night. It felt like we were rediscovering each other, like we were peeling back the layers of pain and betrayal and finding something beautiful underneath. One evening, we decided to have a movie night. It had been so long since we just sat down together, watching something silly, laughing, enjoying each other's company. We made popcorn, gathered a pile of blankets, and settled in on the couch. The movie was a romantic comedy, something light and funny, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw Rachel truly relax. She laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners, her smile genuine and bright. It was a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. As the movie ended, Rachel turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling, "for everything, for not giving up on me, for giving me a second chance. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know I've hurt you, but I'm so grateful that you're still here. I love you, Mark." I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. "I love you too, Rachel," I said softly, my voice cracking. "And I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, no matter what." She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine, her tears spilling over. We sat there for a moment, holding each other, the warmth of her touch reminding me of why I had chosen to stay, why I had chosen to fight for us. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was worth it. The next few weeks were a turning point for us. Rachel started therapy, something that she had been hesitant about at first but had ultimately agreed to. She wanted to work on herself, to understand why she had made the choices she had, and to find a way to heal from the pain she had caused. I could see the effort she was putting in, the way she was trying to understand herself better, to become the partner I deserved. It wasn't an easy journey, and there were still moments when the past resurfaced, moments when the pain felt too raw, too overwhelming. But we were facing it together, and that made all the difference. One day, after one of her therapy sessions, Rachel came home with a look of determination in her eyes. She walked over to me, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for mine. "I want to tell you something," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Something that I've been working through in therapy." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Okay," I said gently. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with emotion. "I've realized that a lot of what I did came from a place of fear," she said. "Fear of not being enough, fear of failure, fear of losing you. I let that fear control me, and I made choices that hurt you, that hurt us. But I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to let fear dictate my life. I want to be better, Mark. For you, for our family, for myself." I felt a lump form in my throat, my heart aching as I looked at her. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the determination to change, to grow. It was the Rachel I had always known, the strong, resilient woman who never backed down from a challenge. I reached for her, pulling her into my arms, holding her close. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You're stronger than you know, Rachel. And I'm here, every step of the way." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned into me, her body trembling as she let herself be vulnerable. It was a moment of raw honesty, a moment that reminded me of why I had chosen to fight for us. Because despite everything, despite the pain and the betrayal, I still loved her. I still believed in us. As the days turned into weeks, life began to settle into a new kind of normal. We found small ways to reconnect, cooking dinner together, going for walks in the park, playing board games with the kids. It was in those small moments that I began to see the pieces of our life coming back together. Not in the same way they had been before, but in a way that felt stronger, more genuine. We were no longer pretending that everything was perfect, no longer hiding from the difficult conversations. Instead, we were facing them head-on, with honesty, with vulnerability, with love. One afternoon, Rachel suggested that we start a new tradition. Something that was just for us, something that would help us continue to grow together. "What if we do a weekly date night?" she asked, her eyes filled with hope. "Just the two of us, no phones, no distractions. A chance to really connect, to talk, to laugh." I smiled, my heart swelling at the thought. "I think that sounds perfect," I said softly. "I'd love that." And so we began our new tradition. Every Friday night, after the kids were in bed, we would have our date night. Sometimes it was as simple as cooking a new recipe together. Sometimes it was watching a movie, and sometimes it was just sitting on the porch, talking about our hopes and dreams. It was during those date nights that I began to see the change in Rachel, the way she was opening up, the way she was letting herself be vulnerable, the way she was allowing herself to be fully present with me. It was during those nights that I began to see the possibility of a future for us. A future that was built on love, on trust, on honesty. One night, as we sat on the porch, the stars twinkling above us, Rachel turned to me, her eyes filled with emotion. "Do you think we'll ever truly be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my heart heavy but hopeful. "I think we're already on our way," I said softly. "We're not perfect, and we never will be. But we're trying. We're choosing each other, every day, despite everything we've been through. And I think that's what makes us stronger." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "I love you, Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking. And I promise I'll keep fighting for us. I'll keep choosing you. I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. I love you too, Rachel, I said softly. And I'll keep choosing you, every day. As we sat there, holding each other, the night sky above us, I realized that love wasn't about never making mistakes. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about forgiveness, about growth, about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. It was about being willing to face the challenges, to fight for what mattered most. Rachel and I had been through hell, but we were finding our way back. We were rebuilding not just our marriage, but ourselves. We were learning to trust again, learning to love each other in a deeper, more honest way. And as I held her close, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together. One day at a time, with love, with hope, and with an unwavering commitment to each other. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Choosing each other, every day, no matter what. Life slowly began to return to normal as the weeks passed. Rachel and I had begun to find a rhythm, a fragile balance that allowed us to reconnect and rebuild, even with the lingering uncertainty of Greg's influence. We were working hard on our relationship, and each day brought small victories. Moments of laughter, instances where we chose each other despite everything. Felt good, felt hopeful. But there was still one looming threat that we couldn't ignore: Greg. Though Rachel had given her statement to the police and they were building a case against him, we hadn't heard much since. It was frustrating, the uncertainty gnawing at the edges of our happiness, making it hard to fully relax. I could tell that Rachel was constantly on edge, the fear of Greg showing up again lingering in her mind. We both knew that as long as he was free, we weren't entirely safe. One Friday evening, just before our weekly date night, we received an unexpected phone call. Rachel answered, her face going pale as she listened to the voice on the other end. She glanced at me, her eyes wide with fear, and I immediately knew something was wrong. "It's Detective Harris," she whispered, her voice shaking as she handed me the phone. My heart sank, dread washing over me as I took the phone from her, my mind racing with possibilities. "Detective," I said, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" Harris's voice was calm but serious. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry to call so late, but I thought you both needed to know. We've arrested Greg." A rush of relief surged through me, and I felt my knees almost give way. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself, my heart pounding. "You got him?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Harris replied. "We received enough statements, including Rachel's, to build a solid case. We brought him in this afternoon, and he's being held without bail. He won't be able to bother you again." I closed my eyes, tears welling up as the weight of the past months seemed to lift off my shoulders. I looked over at Rachel, who was watching me with wide eyes, her face pale, her hands trembling. I nodded, giving her a small smile. "He's in custody, Rachel," I whispered. "They arrested him." The moment the words left my mouth, Rachel's face crumpled, her tears spilling over as she covered her face with her hands. She let out a sob, her body trembling, and I rushed over to her, wrapping my arms around her, pulling her close. "It's over," I whispered, my voice breaking. "He can't hurt us anymore." She clung to me, her tears soaking into my shirt, her body shaking as she let out all the fear, all the pain that had been building up inside her for so long. I held her, my own tears falling as I realized just how much we had been carrying. How much fear, how much doubt, how much pain. And now, finally, we could start to heal without the shadow of Greg hanging over us. After I hung up the phone, Rachel and I sat on the couch, holding each other in silence. The relief was palpable, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could truly breathe. I could see the difference in Rachel too, the way her body seemed to relax, the way the tension that had been a constant presence seemed to melt away. We were free. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now that he's gone?" I took a deep breath, my heart swelling with a mix of hope and determination. "Now we move forward," I said, my voice trembling. We focus on us, on our family. We rebuild without fear, without doubt. We start over. Rachel nodded, her tears spilling over, her eyes filled with emotion. I want that, she whispered. I want to put all of this behind us. I want to focus on us, on our love, on our family. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, my heart aching with both love and hope. Then that's what we'll do, I said softly. We'll take it one day at a time, just like we have been. We'll keep choosing each other, every day, no matter what. She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine. I love you, Mark, she whispered, her voice trembling. Thank you for standing by me, even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for loving me. I love you too, I said, my voice cracking. And you do deserve it, Rachel. You deserve love and you deserve happiness. We both do. The weeks that followed Greg's arrest were filled with a newfound sense of peace. There were no more sleepless nights filled with fear, no more looking over our shoulders, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Rachel and I were finally able to focus on us, on rebuilding, on reconnecting, on finding joy in the little moments that we had once taken for granted. We continued our weekly date nights, but they became even more special now that the weight of fear was gone. We laughed more, shared more, and I could feel our bond growing stronger. Rachel was more open, more vulnerable, and I could see the effort she was putting into our relationship, the way she was fighting for us, for our love. One evening, as we sat on the porch, the sun setting in the distance, Rachel turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and determination. I've been thinking, she began, her voice soft. I want to renew our vows. I looked at her, surprised, my heart swelling with emotion. You do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. I want to start over, Mark. I want to make new promises, ones that reflect who we are now, after everything we've been through. I want to show you, and myself, that I'm committed to us, that I love you, and that I'll always choose you. I felt a lump form in my throat, my heart aching with love for this woman who had fought so hard to come back to me. I'd love that, I whispered, my voice cracking. I want to make those promises too. I want to start over with you. She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine in a gentle kiss. It was a kiss filled with love, with hope, with a promise of a future that we would build together. A future that was stronger, more honest, and more beautiful than anything we had ever imagined. We decided to keep the vow renewal simple. Just us, our kids, and a few close friends. It wasn't about a big celebration. It was about the two of us, about the love we shared and the journey we had been on. We stood in our backyard, the sun shining down on us, our children by our sides, and we made new promises. Promises to love, to cherish, to forgive, to fight for each other, every day, no matter what. As I looked at Rachel, her eyes filled with tears, her smile radiant, I realized just how far we had come. We had faced darkness, betrayal, fear, and pain, but we had come out the other side stronger, more connected, more in love than ever before. We had chosen each other, even when it was hard, even when it hurt, and that was what made our love so beautiful. That night, after everyone had left, Rachel and I sat together on the porch, the stars twinkling above us, the warmth of the day still lingering in the air. She looked at me, her eyes filled with love, her hand resting on mine. Do you think we'll be okay now? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my heart swelling with hope. I think we're already okay, I said softly. We've been through hell, but we made it. We're here, together, and that's all that matters. We're stronger now, Rachel, and we're going to be just fine. She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. I love you, Mark, she whispered, and I promise, I'll keep choosing you, every day, for the rest of my life. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, my heart filled with love and peace. I love you too, I whispered, my voice cracking. And I'll keep choosing you no matter what. As we sat there, holding each other, the stars above us, I realized that our love had been tested in ways I never imagined. We had faced betrayal, fear, and pain, but we had also found forgiveness, growth, and an unbreakable bond. We had chosen each other every day, through the darkest of times, and that was what made our love so strong, so real. And as I held Rachel close, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together, with love, with hope, and with an unwavering commitment to each other. The months that followed our vow renewal felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one that was filled with hope, with love, and with the strength we had found in each other. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt different now. Lighter, more meaningful, as if we had finally put the past behind us and were ready to move forward. Rachel and I were closer than ever, and I could see the changes in her. The way she approached each day with a sense of purpose, the way she opened up to me in ways she never had before. We were both committed to making our relationship work, and we were willing to put in the effort to rebuild what had been broken. It was a slow process, filled with moments of vulnerability, moments of fear, and moments of incredible joy. We had learned to trust each other again, to communicate openly, and to appreciate the small things, the laughter, the quiet moments, the comfort of knowing that we were in this together. One morning, as we sat together on the back porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise, Rachel turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and excitement. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft, "that maybe it's time for me to start over in a different way too. I've been looking at some job opportunities, something new, something that doesn't remind me of everything that happened." I looked at her, surprised but proud. "You want to leave the company?" I asked, my voice filled with curiosity. She nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Yes," she said. "I want a fresh start. I want to work somewhere that makes me feel happy, where I can grow without the memories of everything that happened with Greg hanging over me. I deserve that, and I think it would be good for us too." I smiled, my heart swelling with love. "I think that's a great idea," I said softly. "You deserve to be happy, Rachel. You deserve a new beginning." She reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." "I love you, Mark. I love you too," I said, my voice cracking. "And I'll always believe in you. You're stronger than you know, Rachel." In the weeks that followed, Rachel began applying for new jobs, and it was incredible to see her confidence grow as she put herself out there. She landed an interview with a new company, one that was smaller, more personal, and focused on projects that she was genuinely passionate about. When she received the job offer, I could see the excitement in her eyes, the hope, the sense of possibility that came with starting over. It was as if a weight had been lifted, as if she was finally able to embrace the future without the shadows of the past holding her back. On her first day at the new job, we decided to celebrate. I took the day off, dropped the kids off at school, and when Rachel came home that evening, I had dinner waiting, her favorite meal, a bottle of wine, and candles flickering on the table. She walked in, her eyes widening in surprise, her smile radiant as she looked around. "Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You didn't have to do all this." I walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her, pulling her close. "Yes, I did," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Today's a big day, a new beginning for you, for us, and I wanted to celebrate that." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, her smile warm and genuine. "I love you so much," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know how I got so lucky to have you by my side." I leaned in, pressing my forehead against hers, my heart swelling with love. "We're both lucky," I whispered, "because we chose each other, and we're still choosing each other every single day." That night, as we sat together at the dinner table, laughing, talking about her new job, about our plans for the future, I realized just how far we had come. We had faced darkness, betrayal, fear, and pain, but we had also found hope, forgiveness, and a deeper connection than ever before. We had chosen to fight for each other, to rebuild what had been broken, and now, finally, we were reaping the rewards of that choice. One weekend, we decided to take a family trip, something that we hadn't done in a long time. The kids were thrilled, their laughter and excitement filling the car as we drove to the lake, a place we had visited many times before when they were younger. It felt good to be together as a family, to create new memories that weren't overshadowed by fear or doubt. We spent the weekend hiking, playing games, roasting marshmallows by the campfire, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was exactly what we needed, a reminder of the love that had always been there, even during the toughest times. As we sat by the campfire on our last night, the kids curled up in their sleeping bags, Rachel turned to me, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire, her smile soft and genuine. "Do you think we're finally okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with hope. I looked at her, my heart swelling with love, and I nodded. "I think we're more than okay," I said gently. "We're stronger than we've ever been, Rachel. We've been through hell, but we made it out together. And that's what matters most." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I love you, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And I promise to keep choosing you, every single day, for the rest of my life." I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, my heart filled with love and gratitude. "I love you too, Rachel," I whispered, "and I promise to keep choosing you, no matter what." As we sat there, the warmth of the fire enveloping us, the stars twinkling above, I realized that we had found our way back to each other. Our love wasn't perfect. It had been tested, broken, and rebuilt, but it was real. It was stronger than it had ever been, because it was built on honesty, on forgiveness, on a commitment to choose each other every day, no matter what. And as I held Rachel close, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together, with love, with hope, and with an unwavering commitment to each other. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Choosing each other every day, no matter what. The journey we had been on was filled with challenges, heartbreak, and moments of doubt. But it was also filled with growth, love, and hope. We had faced the darkness together, and we had come out stronger, more connected, and more in love than ever before. We weren't perfect, and we never would be, but we were willing to fight for each other, to grow, to forgive, and to love without reservation. And that was enough. It was more than enough.